She was quite known for her feisty personality.
Feeling that we got when they came out with the baby, we couldn't miss it again. We couldn't miss this one.
So, Princess Anne had barely lifted the royal tiara onto Princess Charlotte's head before the entire palace seemed to stop breathing. Across the grand hall, Camilla's expression changed instantly, and stunned whispers swept through every corner as cameras captured the unforgettable moment. But here's the thing, this wasn't simply an unexpected tribute. It carried a forgotten meaning that only a handful of senior royals truly understood. And that's when everything unraveled. We're about to uncover why one symbolic gesture sparked such fury. So, what do you think really happened? Share your thoughts in the comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now, because this story only gets more unbelievable. A crown changes everything. Okay, so let's talk about what actually happened inside the palace that afternoon. Because the moment everyone remembers wasn't announced on the official schedule. The celebration had unfolded exactly as expected, until Princess Anne quietly rose from her seat. Conversations faded one by one. Musicians lowered their instruments. Even the photographers seemed to sense that something unusual was about to happen. Princess Charlotte, smiling beside her parents, believed she was simply attending another formal family occasion. She had absolutely no idea that within seconds, every eye in the room would be fixed on her. Anne walked forward with the calm confidence that had defined her entire public life. There was no dramatic flourish, no attempt to draw attention to herself. In her hands rested an elegant velvet case, unlike the presentation boxes normally used for royal gifts. It looked older, its gold trim softened by time, as though it had witnessed generations of history. King Charles watched with quiet curiosity from his seat, while Catherine exchanged a puzzled glance with Prince William, both clearly wondering why this unexpected presentation had never appeared on the day's itinerary. But here's where things changed. Without asking anyone for permission or inviting an official announcement, Anne stopped directly in front of Charlotte and gently opened the case. Resting inside was an extraordinary ceremonial tiara, whose delicate craftsmanship reflected the palace lights like tiny stars. A collective gasp swept across the grand hall before anyone could stop themselves. Courtiers leaned forward. Distinguished guests whispered behind folded programs. Camera shutters erupted almost simultaneously, capturing every expression as history seemed to pause in the middle of the celebration. Charlotte looked from the tiara to her great-aunt, visibly overwhelmed. She instinctively glanced toward William and Catherine, almost asking for reassurance without saying a single word. William offered a small, encouraging nod, while Catherine's warm smile concealed genuine surprise. Neither of them had expected this moment any more than the guests surrounding them. What nobody realized was that Anne had already made her decision long before anyone entered the ballroom. She carefully lifted the tiara and, with remarkable gentleness, placed it upon Charlotte's head. The room remained completely silent. No applause followed. Instead, there was only stunned disbelief as everyone struggled to understand what this symbolic gesture truly meant. Across the hall, Camilla's expression hardened almost instantly. Her polite smile disappeared, replaced by unmistakable disbelief before her eyes narrowed toward Anne. Charles noticed the reaction immediately, but remained motionless, choosing observation over intervention as the atmosphere grew heavier with every passing second. The cameras captured everything: the astonished guests, Charlotte's uncertain smile, William's thoughtful expression, Catherine's quiet pride, and Camilla standing perfectly still, as though trying to process something far bigger than a ceremonial gift. It no longer felt like an ordinary royal celebration. It felt like the beginning of a moment that would be discussed long after the ballroom had emptied. And then Anne finally looked around the room, took a measured breath, and prepared to explain why Charlotte, and not anyone else, had received that remarkable honor. Then Camilla finally stood up. Why had that single gesture silenced the room? What did she intend to say before everyone? Could one unexpected response transform admiration into confrontation and expose tensions nobody believed would surface during the ceremony. Leaving Anne watching in stunned silence? Keep watching. Honor beyond ancient royal jewels. And just as the whispers threatened to overwhelm the room, Princess Anne finally broke the silence. Her voice wasn't loud, yet every person inside the grand ballroom heard every word. She rested one hand gently on Charlotte's shoulder before looking across the gathering with the steady confidence that had earned her respect throughout decades of royal service. "This," she began, "is not a reward, and it is certainly not a declaration of rank. It is a reminder." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Guests who had been admiring the tiara suddenly realized Anne wasn't talking about jewelry at all. Okay, so let's talk about why those words landed with such force. Most people present recognized the ceremonial tiara as an elegant historical piece, but very few knew the tradition attached to it. According to an old custom that had quietly faded over generations, the tiara could be presented by a senior member of the family to a younger royal who best embodied the qualities expected to guide the monarchy into the future. It wasn't about succession. It wasn't about titles. It represented compassion, service, resilience, and the willingness to place duty above personal ambition. Anne wasn't changing history. She was reviving a forgotten chapter of it. Charlotte's eyes widened as the significance slowly settled in. Only moments earlier, she believed she had received an unexpected family keepsake. Now she realized Anne had entrusted her with something far greater. Catherine watched her daughter with unmistakable pride, though even she seemed emotional as she absorbed Anne's explanation. William remained remarkably still, but anyone looking closely could see the thoughtful expression crossing his face. This wasn't simply an affectionate gesture toward his daughter. It was a public vote of confidence in the person Charlotte might one day become. King Charles leaned back slightly, saying nothing. His silence became almost as noticeable as Anne's speech. He studied the reactions unfolding across the room instead of interrupting them. Some guests nodded respectfully, while others exchanged quiet conversations, trying to remember whether they had ever heard of such a tradition. Historians, diplomats, and longtime palace advisors murmured among themselves, each offering different interpretations. Within minutes, the ceremony had transformed into the only subject anyone wanted to discuss. But here's where the mood changed again. Anne turned toward Charlotte and smiled warmly. "A crown," she said softly, "never defines the person who wears it. The character does." Charlotte lowered her eyes for a moment, visibly moved by the responsibility those words carried. The room, once filled with uncertainty, seemed to settle into thoughtful admiration. Even several guests who had arrived expecting a routine celebration quietly applauded, recognizing that they had witnessed something genuinely meaningful. Not everyone shared that feeling. Across the ballroom, Camilla's composed expression gradually disappeared. Her gaze shifted from Charlotte to Anne, then toward Charles, searching for some sign that the ceremony would be challenged. Instead, she found only thoughtful silence. The applause continued. The whispers grew louder, and the symbolism became impossible to ignore. In that single moment, Camilla appeared to understand exactly how the public might interpret Anne's gesture, and the realization seemed to ignite something she could no longer conceal. Then, without another moment of hesitation, Camilla slowly rose from her chair. What happened after the guests left exposed even deeper divisions. Why did Charles remain silent? What private decision stunned everyone afterward? Could Anne's defiance reshape the family's future forever, or was someone else already preparing a decisive response behind palace doors that night all along? Let's find out. Silence shattered before everyone's eyes. The applause vanished almost instantly, replaced by a silence so complete it felt as though the entire ballroom had stopped breathing. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead while every eye turned toward the queen consort, waiting to see whether she would congratulate Charlotte or challenge what had just occurred. One look at Camilla's expression answered that question before she spoke. Her posture remained composed, yet the tension across her face told another story. She looked at Charlotte, then the ceremonial tiara, before focusing on Princess Anne. Calmly, she remarked that the ceremony appeared to have gone much further than anyone had expected. Though polite, her words carried an unmistakable edge that rippled through the room. Anne did not answer immediately. Instead, she allowed the silence to linger, meeting Camilla's gaze without hesitation. That quiet confidence unsettled the audience more than any heated exchange could have. King Charles watched closely with folded hands while William instinctively stepped nearer to Charlotte. Catherine gently rested a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder, silently reminding her there was nothing to fear despite the growing tension. Camilla questioned whether such an important symbolic honor should have been presented without wider family discussion. She argued that traditions carried enormous responsibility, and that unexpected gestures could easily be misunderstood by both the public and the monarchy. Although she never criticized Charlotte directly, everyone understood her real concern was Anne's decision to revive a tradition many believed had quietly disappeared. Anne stepped forward, her expression calm. She replied that traditions survived because someone chose to remember them. Her simple words carried remarkable weight. She explained that the ceremony was never intended to elevate one family member above another. Instead, it honored qualities capable of inspiring future generations, including compassion, integrity, and service. Those values, she said, belong to the monarchy as a whole, rather than any individual. The reaction became impossible to ignore. Senior guests nodded thoughtfully, while palace officials whispered among themselves. Historians listened with fascination, diplomats observed every exchange carefully, and even household staff struggled to hide their curiosity. Charlotte stood quietly beneath the tiara, appearing more concerned about the disagreement than herself. William smiled reassuringly, while Catherine reminded her that difficult moments often revealed true character. Charles remained silent throughout, allowing both women to speak without interruption. His restraint deepened the suspense. Even after the Master of Ceremonies resumed the program, conversation centered entirely on Anne's gesture and Camilla's objection. When the guests departed, everyone sensed the disagreement was only beginning. Tensions refused to fade, yet Anne's forgotten revelation threatened to change every conversation. What had everyone overlooked for years? Why did her quiet reminder leave the room speechless? Could one long-buried truth reshape Charlotte's future and the family's fragile balance forever? Or was something else hidden? Stay with us. Behind closed palace doors. As the final guests departed and the grand ballroom emptied, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted completely. The smiles reserved for photographers faded, replaced by thoughtful silence echoing through the marble corridors. Staff quietly closed the towering doors behind the royal family, leaving only Anne, King Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine, and Charlotte inside a private drawing room overlooking the palace gardens. What had appeared to the public as an unexpected ceremony was now becoming a deeply personal family discussion, far removed from cameras, applause, and public expectations. The real conversation was only beginning. Charles invited everyone to sit before speaking. His voice remained calm, but his seriousness was unmistakable. He acknowledged that the ceremony had raised important questions and insisted every perspective deserved to be heard before anyone reached conclusions. Rather than criticizing Anne or Camilla, he encouraged understanding instead of emotion. Judging by the expressions around the room, however, that would not be easy. Camilla spoke first. Although calmer than before, she admitted her concerns had never been about Charlotte personally. Instead, she worried that reviving forgotten ceremonial traditions without broader discussion could send unintended messages throughout Britain and the Commonwealth. Royal symbols, she argued, carried enormous influence, and once the public interpreted them, controlling the narrative became almost impossible. William listened before offering a different perspective. He admitted the ceremony had surprised him, but emphasized that Charlotte had responded with humility rather than excitement. She had accepted the honor as a responsibility, not a reward. Catherine agreed, revealing that Charlotte's first concern afterward had been whether she had unintentionally upset someone she respected. That admission softened the atmosphere, reminding everyone of her sincerity. Anne had anticipated nearly every concern raised during the discussion. She waited until everyone finished before calmly explaining that she had never intended to create division or challenge anyone's position. Her purpose was simply to preserve traditions that still carried meaning. Every generation inherited history, she said, but only a few decided which customs deserved to survive. Charlotte represented the values Anne believed should define the monarchy's future because of her character, not merely her birth. Silence settled across the room as Charles weighed family unity against Anne's conviction. Camilla found herself increasingly isolated as no one questioned Anne's sincerity, even if they doubted her approach. Then Anne reached into a leather portfolio, placed a carefully preserved parchment on the table, and quietly said, "There's something about this tradition that almost everyone has forgotten." Yet Anne still hadn't revealed the real reason Charlotte was chosen. Why keep that truth hidden? What private promise changed everything? Could one long-buried royal secret explain her decision and leave even the palace questioning everything that followed afterward, for everyone involved all along now? Stay glued. Ancient traditions return with purpose. The room fell completely silent after Anne placed the weathered parchment on the polished table. Nobody reached for it at first. It carried no glittering jewels or impressive royal seals. Instead, it contained something far more significant, a forgotten piece of history. Charles leaned closer, studying the elegant handwriting across the fragile pages. William and Catherine exchanged thoughtful glances, while Charlotte, still wearing the ceremonial tiara, stared at the document with growing curiosity. The evening no longer felt like a celebration. It had become a search for the deeper meaning behind everything that had just happened. Then the story took an unexpected turn. Anne explained that months earlier, while helping prepare an unrelated archival exhibition, she had consulted palace historians. During those discussions, one forgotten reference kept appearing in centuries-old correspondence. It described a rare ceremonial honor, reserved for moments when a senior royal believed someone from a younger generation truly represented the values the monarchy hoped to preserve. The custom had never been connected to succession, wealth, or political influence. Instead, it publicly recognized character before responsibility. Charles carefully lifted the parchment and read several passages aloud. The document described earlier ceremonies held during difficult periods when the royal family sought to remind itself what mattered most. One passage explained that presenting a ceremonial tiara symbolized trust rather than privilege. It was never intended to place one person above another. Instead, it represented the responsibility to uphold compassion, dignity, and service for future generations. Anne then revealed she had not relied on a single document. Before acting, she had quietly consulted respected palace historians, archivists, and constitutional advisors. Together, they confirmed the tradition had never been officially abolished. It had simply faded as modern ceremonies replaced older customs. Their findings convinced Anne she was not inventing a new tradition, but restoring an important part of royal heritage. Her explanation transformed the atmosphere. Camilla's earlier objections lost much of their certainty because the ceremony clearly rested on authentic historical foundations. Although she still questioned the timing, even those who had doubted Anne began seeing the event differently. Charlotte glanced at the tiara with fresh understanding. It no longer felt like an unexpected gift, but a promise she had unknowingly accepted. Catherine gently squeezed her daughter's hand, while William smiled proudly. Charles folded the parchment and quietly observed that history sometimes waits until the right generation remembers its purpose. The room settled into thoughtful silence before Anne looked directly at Charlotte and admitted one crucial part of the story still remained untold. What could possibly silence a room already overwhelmed with emotion? Why did Anne save her final words until that precise moment? And what hidden revelation was so powerful that even seasoned royals struggled to conceal their reactions as everything suddenly changed. Stay tuned. Quiet moments defined her character. Anne's words lingered in the room long after she finished speaking about the forgotten tradition. Silence settled over everyone. Charles still held the old parchment, while Charlotte stood motionless beneath the ceremonial tiara, waiting for the explanation Anne had promised. The history behind the honor had finally been revealed, yet one question remained. Why Charlotte? Out of every young royal, why had Anne decided this moment belonged to her? The answer surprised everyone. Anne looked directly at Charlotte and quietly said, "I didn't choose you because of your title. I chose you because of everything you do when you believe nobody is watching." Instantly, the atmosphere changed. This was no longer about royal rank or public appearances. Anne explained that for years she had paid closer attention to quiet, ordinary moments than to grand ceremonies. In her view, true character never revealed itself during official events, appeared when no cameras were present, no speeches were expected, and no praise could be earned. She then recalled moments few people even knew about. At a community garden, Charlotte had stepped away from photographers to help an elderly volunteer gather flower pots scattered by a sudden gust of wind. During a visit to a children's hospital, after the official schedule had ended, Charlotte asked to stay longer with a nervous young patient who seemed afraid to smile. There were no reporters nearby, no official photographs afterward, and no public recognition. Anne remembered watching quietly as Charlotte never once glanced toward the cameras. William lowered his head, remembering those occasions. Catherine smiled gently, though emotion filled her eyes. She admitted Charlotte often asked afterward whether she had done enough for the people she met, instead of wondering whether she had followed royal protocol correctly. Those questions, Catherine said, revealed the kind of person her daughter hoped to become. Anne agreed, adding that genuine compassion could never be rehearsed. Charles slowly rose and approached Charlotte. Looking at the tiara before meeting her eyes, he said, "The finest traditions survive because people give them meaning. Tonight, your aunt reminded us that service begins long before responsibility." Overwhelmed, Charlotte quietly admitted she wasn't sure she deserved such trust. Anne smiled warmly. The people most worthy of responsibility are often the ones who question whether they've earned it. Camilla remained silent, her earlier frustration giving way to reflection. Then Anne stepped forward once more, her expression suddenly solemn. "There is still one promise I intend to make before this evening ends," she said. The room fell silent again. Everyone waited. Questions still linger. Did Charlotte truly understand the weight she accepted? Why did Anne's final glance leave seasoned royals unsettled? Could Charles' praise signal a deeper shift within the monarchy? Or was an even greater surprise already quietly unfolding behind the palace doors after all? A legacy finds new purpose. So, Anne's final words settled over the room like stillness after a powerful storm. Every conversation stopped, and even the ticking clock above the fireplace seemed louder. Charlotte looked toward her great-aunt with quiet anticipation, while William, Catherine, Charles, and Camilla waited to hear the promise Anne believed was important enough to conclude an unforgettable evening. The ceremony had already reshaped everyone's view of an ancient tradition, yet Anne insisted the story was not ending. Instead, she believed its true purpose was only beginning. Stepping closer, Anne gently placed both hands on Charlotte's shoulders. "I can pass down a symbol," she said softly, "but I cannot pass down its meaning. That part belongs to you." She explained that the ceremonial tiara should never be worn simply because tradition required it. Instead, Charlotte should wear it only for occasions centered on service, compassion, and giving attention to people whose voices often went unheard. The tiara became more than an heirloom. It became a lifelong responsibility. Charlotte responded in a way no one expected. Instead of smiling with excitement, she carefully removed the tiara and held it in both hands. Looking first at Anne and then at King Charles, she quietly said, "If I ever wear this again, I want it to remind people of kindness, not of me." Silence filled the room. Her simple words carried greater weight than any prepared speech. William's face reflected unmistakable pride, while Catherine reached for her daughter's hand, deeply moved by her maturity. Charles finally broke the silence with a warm smile. He said this was exactly what the family should remember. He explained that the monarchy had always been defined not only by crowns and ceremonies, but by each generation's willingness to preserve tradition while renewing its purpose. Anne's decision reminded everyone that symbols mattered only when they inspired meaningful action. Camilla, who had fiercely challenged the ceremony earlier, watched Charlotte return the tiara to its velvet case. Although she still held reservations, she could no longer ignore Anne's sincere intentions. Without another argument, she simply nodded respectfully toward Charlotte, signaling that understanding had begun replacing conflict. Mourning? The ceremony had inspired conversations far beyond palace walls. People spoke less about jewels and protocol than about humility, service, and responsibility. Anne watched the palace gardens, confident the tiara's greatest legacy would always be compassion, character, and hope for generations ahead. So, what do you think? Did Princess Anne make the right choice honoring Charlotte, or did Camilla have valid concerns? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more royal stories.